Hey, some of you guys are thinking about taking your paper one over, and so we wanted to give you another little primer and some sort of feedback debrief after your first paper one. So I'm going to go quickly through these concepts. You remember that there are three major focuses for a paper one. Those three focuses are to open with a clear understanding of the setting, plot, etc. Many of you guys just mentioned what the basic poem was about or what the basic passage was about, but you didn't go into the who, the what, the where, the when, the why, maybe even the how. Half a page minimum is probably the best. These are shorter introductions, but you do want to deal with exactly what is happening to make sure that the readers understand that you know and understand before you even begin your interpretation, basically dealing with criterion A. Many of you guys mentioned style, but you didn't necessarily deal with the effects, and certainly it didn't all hit the meaning or your primary concept of what you wrote about. For instance, if you dealt with Winter syntax, the metaphor of writing to a journey, or the concept of the individual metaphors about complete thoughts and sentences. In Impossible Object, you didn't talk about the tension between time and place, Rome and Los Angeles, the time period in which these people Hippolyta is working, the tension between her husband and her father, her past and her present. In The Sea, the tension between memory of one's family and what we want it to be, and then obviously kind of the tension within the family itself. And honestly, I forget the other poems. The golden nuggets are the key lines. Oh, that would be Fishing on the Susquehanna. That's the little egg of time. Anything that you're confused about is probably a golden nugget. So you should definitely deal with that in the sense of the poem. Your understanding of the poems are strong. You guys are all very smart people. Your use of literary terms, you use them a lot, but you didn't necessarily all elaborate on how they have effects and then meaning. And your integration of text, for the most part, you guys are pretty decent with that. Please refrain from using the verb he says or writer says. And then also make sure that you are citing line numbers for the passages at the ends of your sentences. So the things we're going to work on today and what I'm going to talk about in this video are your central threads that are going to help you with criterion A, your knowledge interpretation, understanding interpretation, and then central threads, which is going to have a more cohesive development and organization in criterion C. Additionally, very few of you open your sentences with claims, you open with facts. Those almost always mire your paper in a 4 or a 5, basically a C or a B, because you're just telling us what happened instead of interpreting the concept. And then a lot of you still need to work on your language. The passive voice is so painful that it's hard to actually wade through some of your sentences. Here are the overall issues across the classes, and I've already started to intimate and specifically point out this first one. I wrote stick to the passage on a variety of your papers. Mr. Mohan also talked about imposing an interpretation. Don't try to move outside the passage. Don't talk about how men and women work or how thought is an important concept. Maybe in Fishing in the Susquehanna you can deal with experience and art, but beyond that, stick to what is happening in the excerpt, in the prose piece, in the poem. Secondly, and this is where the meaning through style and effect come in, you definitely need to work with what IB calls a precise and detailed close reading. IB, HL Lit, and SL Lit are all about how an author or an artist uses style and the effects of those choices to arrive at meaning. The third thing you guys can deal with, this should say meaning through style and effect, not MES. The third thing is that you guys want to think about concluding your paragraphs. A lot of you abruptly finished a paragraph and went to the next one with no transitions. That's also going to be something that's going to mire you in a 3 out of 5 for criterion C, organization and development. Tie paragraphs together, but more importantly, what is the central thread? Are you going to talk about art and memory? Deal with that at the very end of every paragraph. Are you going to deal with tension? Return to the concept of tension at the ends of every paragraph. And the last thing, you guys have got to stop using the verb to be. 3 takeaways that we are working with are the idea of what are the significances of your observations in light of the passage. Understand the difference between imposing something, trying to go outside the passage, and then building an argument throughout the subsequent paragraphs, tying them together. And then the other thing is a lot of you guys didn't actually explicitly analyze your use of text. You dropped some text and then moved on to another point. You have to deal with assertion, evidence, and claim. That goes back to the AEC paragraphs you wrote in 9th and 10th grade. What is your assertion? Here's the evidence, and then deal with the claim or the commentary there. So let's use this as an example. This is a final sentence from a paragraph, which is problematic enough, lacking a transition to the next one. The length of those 2 stanzas, 2 and 3, Really, we should say the second and third. There's no reason to have these parentheses here, and that's what sick means. Sick means I left a mistake in the piece. Provide an insight into the incredibly taxing world of a writer. As the readers are placed, passive voice, into the action, are provided with a myriad of imagery of this fantastical story that is being told. The writer's sentence, I don't know why you need to use parentheses. Please stop putting things in parentheses. Actually, I was taught a long time ago to skip anything that's in a parentheses. The writer didn't have enough time or foresight or thought to actually incorporate the concept into the sentence itself, so skip it. It's a waste of time. The writer is moving across the treacherous. I assume that means treacherous. Again, sick means I left the misspelling. Blizzard alone. That's the final sentence. I see the style, but I do not see any effect or analysis of what the length actually dictates or what it talks about. If the length of this, if Collins spent that much time on those two stanzas, why did he choose to do so? Collins did something, right? Think subject verb. That's going to take the passive voice away. And then what's the meaning? What's the insight? I don't really understand what the insight into the incredibly taxing world of a writer is. This type of sentence is something we see over and over and over again. So let's move on to B. In B, again, meaning as seen through style and effect. Meaning, 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 meaning. Focus in your poems, in your prose pieces, in your IOCDs. Everything is predicated on meaning and then how the author deals with that through style and effect. That's the precise and close reading. These are 10 years of mark schemes in prose. All of you mentioned imagery because I showed this to my students at least. You mentioned imagery, but that's about all you mentioned. You got to deal with structure, character relationships. You also have to think about the second and third columns. What are the parallels? What are the comparisons? What are the contrasts? How does the author use irony? Where is the beginning and the ending, the framing of a piece coming in? In poems, structure, 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 and imagery were the top two that I saw, but you didn't really deal a lot with contrast or juxtaposition or narrative perspective, things like that. Taking a look at this is the class of 2020. You got to start your sentences with claims. Facts are going to mire you in a 2 to 3 out of 5 for criterion C. Claims or an assertion is going to begin to actually move toward an argument. And then it's easier to look at my third period, my seventh period. This data is a little bit off. The average length of a paper is going to affect the overall grade. You guys are smart people. The more you write, the more you're going to develop your concepts. That's just kind of an easy game. Let's play this game. Write more. Most of you are going to say more. That's not always the case. There are some students who are in 4s with 4.5 pages of work, but again, they're just not dealing with what I already talked about in criterion A and criterion B. So think about why length is so crucial. You're all here for a reason. You're all incredibly smart. Demonstrate that by writing more. Claims, closures, and transitions are the 3 things that are going to mire you in a 3 or move you to a 4. These are elements that you're supposed to learn subsequently in 6th, 8th, and master transitions by the 11th grade. Show me that you can do this. The last thing is, the more you use passive voice, the more I feel like you're just not purposefully choosing your language. This is the Hamilton College Writing Center 7 Deadly Sins. A lot of you are wordy. I don't understand what you're saying. Don't right-click as you would in your college essays. People want to hear your real voice. You're not necessarily going to be too colloquial. Stop using words like got and things like that. But you really do need to write simply. Think about some of the best teachers you've had. They teach complex ideas in much more simple terms. Don't try to sound smart. When you try to sound smart, you actually confuse the reader. So stop using the verb to be. That could end your reliance on the passive voice. Know what you're saying when you say this or it. It has to have some sort of reference. And then as a joke, eschew obfuscation. Write clearly and simply. Think about trying to explain yourself well. Here's a lesson on integration. You really should only use quotations when you have memorable language or clear and concise language from an author. I'll give you a moment to read the 2 bullet points below that. Okay, so why are you choosing text? Does your quote actually fit with your own sentence, with the grammar? Do you use something like says to introduce? No writer says anything. They're writing. They're not saying. And then again, parenthetical references must come at the ends of sentences, not in the middle of them. So here's a skills lesson. You're welcome to use this, this handout from the University of Arkansas. Here's an example from my online class that I used this week. Here is a decent work. But when he does things like finish work on a project, he says, I'm almost happy this Saturday because at moments like these, he feels close to his father. Komuniaka, poet, line 13, parentheses, period, end. No parentheses before, and obviously the parenthetical references at the end. However, this author, this writer, this student chooses to say says. It's just not true. Move away from saying says. Here's a different way of writing that. He does things like finish work on a project so that he can, quote, be happy this Saturday, end quote, because at moments like these, he feels close to his father. There's a difference there. It's better integrated into the context of the student's own ideas and thoughts. Here's another good one. People should rage against, away from the dying light and not, quote, go gentle into that good night, end quote, because they must put up a fight. From Dylan Thomas, and this is a little bit of a mistake. That's not, if you choose to use subsequent lines, that's how you would do it. Okay, so we're going to skip that and look at grades. C, essays, show that the student understands, but there's no real interpretation. There may be some granular analysis, but not a lot. You list stylistic features. You rarely deal with effects and the meanings. Paragraphs are islands. They're not connected. And then your language is just really kind of confusing or hard to understand. Here are the breakdown of those elements, and you can choose to come back to this if you want to. Overall, fives, they begin to develop an interpretation, but it's not fully developed, and that's something that works in terms of both criterion A and criterion C, organization and development. You begin to analyze style and effect, but you're not hitting the meaning every time you do that. Again, meaning through style and effect, not just style and effect. And then the structure and language are obvious, but they may lack sophistication, i.e. that would be, examples, claims to open, transitions, but also development at the ends of paragraphs. That's going to show sophistication. The final paragraph should be not a repetition of everything you've said, but your overall ideas and what still may be confusing. A lot of you guys just repeated everything you did before. That's an 8th grade tactic. Let's drop that. Overall, sixes. The understanding is clearly obvious. That's well beyond a 6, or what comes well before a 6. Here, a 6 is dealing with the observations and then the significance of them. This is where interpretation is the focus of the piece. Meaning is starting to develop through style and effect. Not even starting, it's just fully there. And then the structure, the architecture of the paper is obviously logical and purposeful. So hopefully if you have questions, you can email us. I hope that this video helps you a little bit. I'm sorry I just did it in one take. I just want to make sure you guys had something to listen to if you wanted to.